So when I was a kid, one of the things that we always heard was people would say, would ask the question, "Where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot?" It was something that people had talked about when I was younger, but it's something I never really understood. And for many people, actually, this idea of where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot didn't really sort of make sense until September 11th. And that's when people my age started to understand what that meant. Because there's moments in time when your life is affected in a way where you'll never forget where you were at that moment, where you will never, that experience is so fundamental to your life that it's something you'll never forget. And for me, we got that news in 1998. My daughter Nechama was on a routine checkup, and a doctor told us something, and words they'll never forget. The doctor said, "Your child is very sick." And what followed was 6 years of medical care, uh, pretty complex actually. And in 2004, she passed away. And what we realized at that time, my wife and I, was that there really wasn't a lot of support for families who lost children, especially the siblings. And the siblings really had no outlet to turn to. And because of that, we decided pretty quickly on, I would say within a few months, we decided that we were going to start to hold an annual retreat. And we did that. We held an annual retreat since probably 2000. I think we ended up getting our act together in 2006, maybe 2005 even. So it was really something that we started very early on. And we had an annual retreat. And that annual retreat was something that was really part and parcel of our family. Everyone in my family was really involved in that. And we got a very big surprise in uh, a couple years back, about 5 years ago. At that point, we've been holding our annual retreat. And what ended up happening was my daughter Miriam, the person who had been most involved, right? We said it was something that was a family involved uh, organization or yearly event, and she was very, very involved in that. And we got a surprise about 5 years ago. She ended up getting sick. So for her, what we realized, while she was sick, and she after she was diagnosed, she continued to be involved with, and um, to participate in, and really run the annual retreats. And everyone knew her. All the people who participated knew her, and they were very involved with her. And at that time, no one had known that she had been sick. And right before, about 3 years ago, a little over 3.5 years ago, she had come. She decided she was 18. She was 21 at this point. She had been sick for around 2.5 years, and she decided that she wanted to just start an organization to formalize an organization around what we've been doing for bereaved families. And uh, about 2 months later, she was, her condition had declined, and within a number of months, she passed away. And we realized right away, we knew what we had to do. We knew that what was important to her, because she had lived and breathed helping families who had a child who passed away, and how important that was to her. So we decided we're going to make an organization to formalize the activities that we're doing and call it Merim. Merim means to lift up in Hebrew, and it also was the same letters as the word Miriam. So for us, it was a no-brainer, so to speak, that this is what we were going to do in her memory, and this is what we continue to do. So even though the first number of years we had been pretty much isolated to a retreat, informally making phone calls, going to Shiva, fielding a lot of questions, and some ad hoc events. When Miriam passed away, about just almost 3 years ago, we decided we're going to hold monthly events. So on a monthly basis, pre-COVID, we were holding all kinds of events for moms, events for girls and siblings, and also events for the whole family. Things like paint nights, get-togethers, support groups of different sorts, and we continue to do that on a monthly basis. With COVID, we had to slow down a little bit, and now we've really ramped it up to we have like 4 or 5 events this month, and we'll continue to every month on Zoom until, God willing, we'll be able to have in-person events again. Since the end of the first retreat, I'd wanted to do something for grandparents. And what I'll share with you very briefly is just that I hold a very soft spot in my heart for grandparents, because I do feel like the grandparents are don't really have an outlet, and there's a lot of uniqueness around the experience of being a grandparent who's lost a grandchild, and we'll talk a little more about that later. I just want to, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I focus a lot on families with, of course, families who lost children, but also all different types of trauma and crisis, and things around that nature. Grief, all kinds of difficulties. So I have many years of experience, both professionally and fortunately personally, with loss of my two children. Around what a grief process. So what I'll ask you to do is, anytime during the program, if you want, you can text me. I'll give you my number, and you can ask any questions for me to address later on in the day. So that number is 718-644-9991. And if you text that number, the question you have, I won't call you out personally, just a question I'll get to. Or alternatively, during the Q&A, if anyone wants to raise a hand or speak out or let me know that they have a question, either through the chat or whatever, any of the Zoom controls that are available, raise a hand. So I'll try to get to them to specifically address those questions. If not, I'll fill in with kind of typical things that I hear and give you some perspective around grandparents and the grieving process and so on, through the experience that I have. We're very, very fortunate to have Rabbi Ginsburg, who has a really unique, unfortunately, a very unique sort of perspective and personal experience. Who I'm sure he'll speak a little about what his experience is. But the Rav is extremely busy, sought after, and we're greatly appreciative for him for having the Rav join us. So without further ado, I ask Rabbi Ginsburg if he could please take the mic, so to speak, just unmute yourself, and take it from there.
Am I heard? You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. This evening of Chizuk that was organized by this incredible family and incredible organization is extremely important. I had, a few years ago, I was invited to speak one evening in Borough Park at a gathering of organization of mothers that lost children, and came to the room. I figured there would be 5, 10, 15 people. There were well over 100 mothers, and there were some grandmothers there as well. And an organization that was organized by 2 women who both of them had lost children. And I was asked to speak and give divrei chizuk. And I felt a little bit like, what can I say? I don't understand, the depth of their pain, what they're going through, the challenges, but I did the best I could. 3 years later, I was invited again. And this time when I walked into the room was even larger, there were more people. And I said that unfortunately this time I'm speaking as a member of the club. I had lost my daughter a few months before that, Sarah Lela Shalom, 17-year-old, my youngest child. And I felt that what I had to share with them then was from a different perspective, perspective from pain, from challenges. And it was a different type of speech, different type of drasha. In the time that I've had this, been a member of this club, I lost a grandson, my It was actually my first grandson born. He had meningitis right when he was born, and he lived 2.5 years. He was sick most of his life, and then of course my daughter a few years later. We were looking for some explanation, not explanation. We're all maminim b'nei maminim, and we're not made to understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things, but sort of trying to find a place where we could fit in, a place where we could somehow make peace with this. And I went to Eretz Yisrael with my wife, and Baruch Hashem have developed very strong relationships with many of the Gedolim, the previous generation, and of this generation as well. And we went on like a tour, a Gedolim tour. We went to over 20 different Rabbanim and asked them to share what they thought would be Divrei Nechama, Divrei Chizuk. And we heard so many things. And the truth is, most of what I heard, I don't even remember. I remember two things that I remember that had given us a completely different perspective. Number one, something that I heard here really in a passing remark that was made by a Rosh Hashiva, very active person in Klal Yisrael today. We were in an elevator together, going up to a third floor, and we began a conversation. And I can mention his name because he never told me not to, Aurelia Bridney. Aurelia Bridney had lost his wife a few years earlier, a wonderful marriage, and she got sick and she passed away. He was alone. And in the elevator, when he saw me, it was the first time that he saw me after I got up from Shiva. And he wanted to share some words of Nechama. And then I asked him, I said, tell me, how do you do it? What do you do? How do you lost your wife of so many years, mother of your children, you're alone. What's your secret? He's always so besimcha, he's always so happy, he's always walking around with a smile on his face. And he told me something so incredibly simple, but it was very powerful to me and entered my neshama. He said, you have to understand, I lived a very busy life. My wife was the principal of a school. She was extremely busy. I'm busy. I give shiurim in yeshiva. And like any other married couple with families with obligations, multi-obligations, we barely get a chance to talk to or see each other. So what was my connection with my wife during the week, except of course not on Shabbos or Yom Tov, was in the morning I'd come back from shul, come back from davening. I would go into the kitchen and I'd prepare a coffee to go and a cup to go, just the way my wife likes it. And she would come flying down the stairs. I'd give her the cup of coffee to take with her, wish her a good day. She would wish me a good day. We had 2 minutes together, and that was it for the day. He says, so what do I do now? I get up in the morning, I go to shul. When I come back to shul, I go over to the pushka. It's on my bookcase. And I take the $2 out of my pocket, the cost of buying a coffee. And I put it in there into the pushka box as a schus for her. And I say a kapitel Tehillim, learn a Mishnah, and then I go about my day. And the idea that he mentioned me the concept was that I take that opportunity and I fill it. There's a void, and I fill that void. I used to be able to make for her a cup of coffee. That was what my contribution. That's how I showed my love and my affection to my wife. And now I do it this way. The same time I spend with her every day was the same time I spend with her now. I thought it was such an incredible, simple, but as I mentioned, profound thought. When you lose someone, there's an agony, there's pain. You want to do something. You wish you could take care of them. My daughter was sick in the last number of weeks. We spent 8 weeks in the hospital with her, barely came home. And you want to keep on doing and trying. But the truth is, it's a different perspective. My wife and I live and breathe every single day doing for our daughter. If she was here when she was a teenager in high school, and we were busy driving her to her friends, to activities at night, to weekends, to Shabbaton, getting together with her friends, to camp and back. Wife would take her shopping, constantly busy, doing for her. Well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for whatever his cheshbon was, but we know it was for good, was the fact that it took away that opportunity for us to do for her. So we just replace it. We just do other things. There is not a day that I get up in the morning and my first thought, what am I going to do for Sarah today? Whether I learn a Mishnah, whether I give tzedakah, whether I'm involved in an organization that we started for her, what am I doing for my daughter today? Just like when she was here, I was there for her, did things for her. My wife did things for her every single day. We continue doing for her. And that is incredibly comforting, incredibly comforting. To be able to understand that there's a responsibility here. You know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu always puts you in a situation to find ways to be mistachim, to ways to have nachama. I remember that there was an Adam Gadol that I knew not very well, only met him a few times, but the famed Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zechrono Livracha, who passed away about 2 years ago. He was a famed teacher, a Rav, world-renowned thinker, philosopher, Bal Machshava. And what he did is that of all his accomplishments, I remember that when I went and I was talking to different Gedolim, someone mentioned to me, why don't you go to Moshe Shapiro? And I said, I have a limited amount of time. I really don't have a relationship with him. I just couldn't get to everybody. And I passed on that opportunity. If only I would have known. Only I would have known. When he passed away, he was in America, and they brought him back to Eretz Yisrael. And I happened to have just flown to Eretz Yisrael. And I went to daven mincha in Shari Chesed, in the Groshul. And as I come in there, I see a tumult, I see people there. I said, what is going on here? And he said, well, they're having a hesped. It's the end of the Shiva period for Moshe Shapiro, and they're having a big hesped for him. And I felt I really didn't know him. I didn't go to the Levaya. I called up my wife. I said, I'm going to be a little bit late. I want to hear some of the hespedim on this great man. And I walked in, I sat down, and one of the students was speaking, a student of his. And he shared the following. He said that Rav Moshe Shapiro had a daughter, and she was 13 years old, and she was sick, and she passed away. I didn't know that. Matter of fact, so many things made sense to me because a lot of things that he did, he named her daughter, his kollel was founded, called Chef Schmeitzer, name on a play of her name. He constantly referred to her, constantly referenced her in so many of his thoughts and his machshavos. But the student said it was interesting. He was in America, came to spend time with him when he was here, sitting by his daughter's bedside in the hospital in Manhattan. And when she was nifteres, when she passed away, they had a levaya first here in America. And Moshe Shapiro got up to speak. And he said the following, such a simple thing. He says, I have not a tviya, a taina on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course not, kas v'shalom. But I have a kasha. I have a question. And listen to the question of an absolutely brilliant Talmud Chacham. He said, there is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Kosher Mishpat, that if two people are partners in something, one is not allowed to use that thing for himself without permission from his partner. In other words, if I share a car with someone, I would have to let him know if I'm taking the car, and he would have to let me know if he's taking the car. Partners have a responsibility to each other, and if one does take something without permission from the other partner, it's no less than stealing from a stranger. It's Geneva Gazela. He said, your Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says that there are three partners in creation of a person. Each person has three shutfim. You, me, and my wife. We are partners. We were partners in my daughter. And a partner in your own Torah says you can't take something without checking with the other partner. And you didn't check with me and my wife. We would not have agreed that you should be able to take my daughter. And he was quiet for a few moments, and he burst out crying. And he composed himself, and he said, however, there is an opinion in Shulchan Aruch that says that if it's so clear and obvious that it benefits the partnership if one would take something, then you don't need permission from the partner. For example, if I'm taking a car, a used car that we have as a partnership, and I have half an hour to bring it someplace and I could exchange it for a brand new car, then I don't have to ask my partner for permission, because obviously he would want its benefit. It's clear that it's something he would want. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your own Torah, says you can't take something from a partner without permission. However, it must be that it's something so special, so good, that you don't need my permission, you don't need my wife's permission, you're able to take so that we would agree. Now, I don't know, and I don't understand why it's so good. I don't understand what's so special. I don't understand the goodness in what you did, but I believe that it is good, and I give you permission. This is the hesped that he had given. Something that I was blown away. I said, why didn't I go to him? Why didn't I go to him when I wanted Nechama, knowing that he went through the same thing? And the answer is Hashem kept it from him. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to find your own Nechama, your own Nechama. And I found my own Nechama. I went to Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, and if it sounds familiar, I wrote this in an article that was published in Mishpacha magazine. I went to Aaron Leib Steinman, who was then close to 100 years old, one of the senior, most great Talmidei Chacham in the world. And went to him, I said, Rebbe, I'm an Ava that I lost my daughter, and he had heard about it. And he began to cry, began to shed a tear, and I said, Rebbe, I want Nechama. Tell me something to give me Nechama. And he patted my chest, my heart, and he says, Nechama will come from here. I didn't know what he meant. I had no idea what he was talking about. And what he meant was that you have to find your own Nechama. I left Eretz Yisrael, and 3 days later I came back, and I happened to have been in a shul saying Kaddish for my daughter. And there was a sefer on the table, and I opened it up, and I saw something incredible. Incredible. And I found my Nechama. Share with you for a moment what I found. Reishis Chachma brings down an incredible thought. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu came down, the Luchos, and Bnei Yisrael was sinning. We all know the story, and he broke the Luchos. And then after Bnei Yisrael, the Tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him to come up again. He came up, and on Yom Kippur, he came down with the second Luchos. Where were the Luchos placed? Says the Medrash, the Luchos were placed in the Aron, in the holiest place in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kodesh Kodashim, where the Aron was, which is the holiest thing in the Mikdash. Inside the Aron, what was in the Aron? The Luchos and pieces of the broken Luchos that Moshe broke. And the question begs, well, why were there the pieces of the original first Luchos? When the first Luchos were broken, the letters scattered and went back to Shemayim. All that was left was a piece of stone, a worthless piece of stone, so to speak. You had the real Luchos that was brought down later. Why was there a need in the Aron to put the broken Luchos together with the luchos, the second luchos. Says the Reishis Chachma, because the Aron represents a human being. All the kelim in the mikdash represented a different limb of a person. And the Aron, which is the center, everything revolved around the Aron, is representative of the heart of a person, the lev of Adam. The Aron was in the center, and so too the heart of a person is centered. Everything in the body works around the heart. And maybe that was the explanation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to teach a lesson, l'netzach netzachim, for eternity, for every bereaved mother and grandmother and grandfather and father, to understand a message, a very important message, that in the lev shel Adam, in the heart of a person, like the Aron, there is room for both luchos and shivri luchos. There's room for the complete luchos, and there's also room next to it, side by side, the broken luchos.
Awesome.
We don't hear you.
When a person, you hear me better?
Now it's good.
Do you hear me? I'm
Yes.
heard? Okay, thank you. So just like, again, that the Aron had room for both, the heart of a person, the lev of a person has room for both. The luchos and the shivri luchos side by side to each other, and they can coexist. I remember when I heard this and I saw this, it uplifted me. And I got a call a few weeks later from a dear friend of mine, lives in Borough Park. There was a tragic accident a few weeks earlier. If you remember, a few summers ago, there was a car of a few older single girls from Borough Park with driving cross country, driving in California, and they had gone to the Grand Canyon Erev Shabbos to take a look at it, and were driving back to Los Angeles for Shabbos, and they were hit by a truck. And two of the girls passed away, Rahman al-Islam Layalenu, and two of them were injured very, very seriously. One walked out without any problem. And one of them that passed away was the youngest child of a large family. All the other siblings were married. And the parents were understandably completely zerbrochen. The father was a little older, had gone through the war, and the father just couldn't deal with this terrible loss. And they were suffering terribly. And meanwhile, it was a few weeks later, and their first granddaughter was getting married. And their mother said, the mother of this child that passed away, the grandmother of the Kala, said, I am not going to this wedding. I cannot go to the wedding. And the Kala called her, and the daughter called, and all the family members got together, and there was nothing they were able to do. She could not bring herself to go to this wedding. The brother of the young woman who passed away, which is an uncle of the Chassan, actually an uncle of the Kala, called me up and shared with me this was going on in his family and asked me if I could help. I got into my car and I drove to Borough Park and I knocked on the door and I went in. And I shared with that mother, that broken-hearted mother, this particular medrash, this interpretation. And I said, you have in your heart shivri luchos, and you think that you're not entitled to enjoy life, you're not entitled to have simchas, you're not entitled to feel whole, to feel happy, and nachas, and all the other things that one should feel and can feel, because your heart is broken. But in your heart, there's room for both. There's room for the shivri luchos and the luchos. And you can go to the wedding and walk down and dance with your granddaughter with a heart full of simcha, even though next to it, in that heart, are the shivri luchos for your daughter. And I got up and I left, and I had no idea if I accomplished anything. But 3 nights later, I received a video on my phone of the grandmother of the Kala dancing with the granddaughter. This was the understanding, the message of Shivri Lukos and Lukos, and I got it and I understood it. And I think that these are important things to know and to be able to cope with. So as I mentioned, number one, to constantly do what you're doing for that person, you continue doing. Part of the loss that we feel, the pain, is that a grandmother, grandfather, mother, father does for their children, for their grandchildren. And you can no longer do, you can no longer give. And that is very painful. But the truth is, no, you can continue giving and doing and loving. You just have to do it in a different way. Two, the understanding, the concept that whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is for good. And in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's own Torah, he had no right to take someone away from his partner, from his partners, mother and father, unless it was something that was so valuable and so good that he doesn't need their permission. And while we may not see it or understand it, but we have to believe in it, that is something way beyond our comprehension that is completely good. And of course, the third thing that I mentioned was the concept of this understanding that the Shivri Lukos and Lukos can live together side by side. But it's not easy. It's challenging. Some days are better than others. Some weeks are better, some months are better. Some Yom Tovim are better. I received a call right before Rosh Hashanah of a woman who called me up that she just couldn't go into Yom Tov. She has such pain in the loss of her son. She just can't get hold of herself. She can't bring herself to go to shul. She's angry. She has tinnitus. And I figured that she must have just lost her son a month or two before, a few months before. It's so fresh. It's so real. She's carrying this tremendous pain. I began to talk to her, and then I asked her how long. It was 11 years before. 11 years that she carried this pain, and the pain now was becoming magnified for whatever reason why. She just couldn't get past it. But we have to get past it. And we have to look at it as Shivri Lukos and Lukos together, side by side, and we can continue to go and to thrive. And not only thrive, but to grow spiritually, to be in the Kodesh Kodashim, like the Aron itself. You know, Bali Musa give a mashal. It's a very powerful mashal. To understand that when we go through challenges, when a Kodesh Baruch Hu takes something from us, it's painful and it's difficult. Yet we have to be able to withstand that nisayon, stand up, hold ourselves up, and continue going. And sometimes that is the greatest thing that we can ever do. We can do mitzvos, we can light candles every Shabbos, we can make challahs, we can put on tefillin and tzitzis, and say Kriya Shema and daven, all of that. But sometimes it's how we accept a terrible, painful gzar din from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how we accept it, how we live with it, how we move on, could sometimes be the greatest challenge of all, and the greatest schar, the greatest reward. They give a mashal of a person, of a general. He was a general who fought many, many brave battles for the king. And now he was retiring. The king wanted to honor him and reward him with something that was very special. And so the king told him that you're retiring after so many years of loyal service, going to battle to protect my kingdom, that I'm going to allow you to stay in the palace for the rest of your life and live in the palace and drink from my wine, eat from my food. It's yours. Everything you see is yours. And you could stay here until time comes for you to leave this world. And this will be my reward for all that you have done. And the person comes, and the first day that he's there, he's so joyous, so happy. He goes into the king's, his winery, goes into the place where the king stores all his best wine. And he starts drinking, and he wasn't used to drinking such a quality wine. And he got shikker. He got drunk. And when he got drunk, he began to act foolishly. And he began to mock the king, make fun of the king. When the king heard that, the king was enraged. Not only do you disrespect me, but in my own palace you disrespect me. And he said that I'm going to have you hung in the outskirts of town by tomorrow morning as a punishment for the way you disrespected me. When they came to get him in the morning to take him out to be hung, they said that, the custom here, is you get one last request. What would be your request? What is your request? He said, I'm my king. I was so loyal to the king. He is my king. I would like to see his face, be in his presence one more time before I'm put to death. And they told the king, it's a reasonable request. The king said, absolutely not. I know him. What he's going to do is start pleading his case, reminding me of all the battles that he won for my behalf. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It was disrespectful. I don't want to hear it. I will go and take him out and ask him a different request, but he's going to be put to death. They come back to him and told him the king said no. So he says, well, okay, what would you like to do? He said, I'll tell you what I want. I want to go in front of the king just to see him one more time. But you don't have to worry, I won't say anything. You can gag me that I won't be able to say anything. Cover my mouth. So I'll be able to go gaze upon my king one more time. And they felt that's reasonable. They took him, the king steps out in the early afternoon to take a stroll, and he brings him, and they bring him in front of the king. And as he stands right in front of the king, he takes his hands and he takes hold of his shirt and he rips open his shirt, baring his chest. And on his chest was scars from the many wounds that he had in the many wars that he fought for the king. When the king saw those scars, the king was moved to mercy, felt terrible, felt very bad for him. And he said, okay, I know you were drunk, you were irresponsible, you couldn't control yourself. What you did was wrong, but I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to reinstate you to be able to live in my palace the rest of your life. That is really us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives everybody scars. Life is not easy. Life is full of scars. Some scars are deeper and bigger than others. Being in this club of losing a child or a grandchild is scars that run very, very deep. And ideas, what we make of it and how we stand strong, we stand tall, and we build it and continue to have bitachon, that this was the right thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. I don't question it. If we do that, this will be the greatest thing that we can accomplish. This will make our situation so much better, so much more productive, that we understand what our responsibilities are as parents and grandparents, to continue doing for all what we couldn't do in a different way than we were able to do before, but we can do for them. This is the understanding. How we deal with it, how we get up and brush ourselves off, and how we go further, and how we let ourselves grow and help people instead of turning the other way. Just look what this family is doing, this home and family is doing, to give the chizuk to others, rather than wallowing in their own pain. Look what they're doing, sharing nechama and support to so many other people. This is an incredible thing, incredible schus for their daughter, for their daughters, and for anybody who does whatever they do. Because with the scars and the deep scars, you're still able to continue to do and to accomplish and to fight for the king, for the Melech Malchei Hamlachim. The king recognizes what you've done, what you do, and will ensure that whatever your needs will be taken care of. These are some of the thoughts that I have in retrospect to be able to cope and to deal with some of these difficult challenges. There is no greater challenge than losing a child, no greater challenge. It's life-changing in so many ways. But it doesn't have to be where life ends, it doesn't have to be where one can't put his one foot in front of the other foot. We have to go on, and we have to look for any opportunity we have to be strong and to continue to do and continue to grow. And my bracha is for everybody here, because Baruch Hu should allow us to have the nechama that we need, to allow us to nechama to be able to be free to do, to accomplish in the zech nishmas of that person. That's the main thing, and to continue to grow. And hopefully, Be'ez Hashem, together we'll be zoche, continue doing for others, and chesed for others, be helping other people to cope. There's no greater mitzvah than that. And we should be zoche, all of us together, to celebrate the binyan of Yerushalayim together with Tchias HaMesim. May you remain upon me.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ginsburg. Greatly appreciate you spending time with us and giving those words of chizuk. And we wish Rabbi Ginsburg sein gesund and should be always be well and healthy.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for that. That was really quite extraordinary. I thought I'd take this opportunity as we enter this next part of the program. If anybody I have a few questions, but if anyone has any additional ones, you can either, I'll pause for a moment and ask for questions, or you can text me at 718-644-9991 if you have any questions, or you could on the Zoom chat, or there's also a way for you to raise your hand. So all those different ways you could ask different questions. I would say I wanted to just first give an opportunity to I just want to give the opportunity to just explain, ever since the first retreat we did, I think it was back in 2005 or 2006, I don't remember, it's been so long. I wanted to do something specifically for grandparents. It really has been something I very much wanted to do. And grandparents, as I said earlier, have a special place, specifically bereaved grandparents have a special place in my heart. And I'll tell you, I'll show you with a short story. The two groups, it's interesting, there are two groups that sort of I find a certain parallel between. And I remember I went into a support group once that a friend of mine was hosting, and they asked me to come. And they were speaking about, it was all fathers who are, the tough group to get together. And there was one father who went there, and he said that he had lost his son, who was a one-day-old baby. And I found myself very moved by his situation. And I remember that what was most difficult for him was the sense that the people around him, there was a tremendous amount of pressure from the people around him to move on, not to mourn, not to grieve, not to be stuck, but to move on with his life, to get over it. And there's a lot of pressure for all of us around that. And he specifically had that pressure because it was a one-day-old baby. I mean, he didn't really get to know his son. It was, the people were saying that to him, or they were saying, well, he'll have another one. We hear that often. And those type of things. And I felt very moved by his situation, specifically because there was so little empathy for him. And the most difficult part for him specifically was from even close family members, even his parents were saying, who had really, really pressured him to move on, to okay, we get it. It's tough, it's difficult, but it's been a while. I don't know how long it was, 6 months, a year. It's been a while. It's time to get over it. It's kind of shake it off. And that was very painful for him. And it moved me very much. And in a certain way, I feel that way about grandparents, because grandparents who have lost a grandchild are very much, they're kind of like in the background. They're kind of, the focus is on the parents, the focus is on the siblings, and of course there should be focus on the parents and the siblings. However, the grandparents really get pushed to the side. It's like they didn't suffer, almost as if they didn't suffer a loss. They're so removed from it. And there's really very little support. There's not a lot of empathy from people around. And for that reason, I find it particularly, I find a special place in my heart for grandparents, because they really don't have that same level of recognition, acknowledgement, because what you've lost is something that it can't be compared to anything in the world. If you think about, if somebody would offer you $1 billion, they wouldn't offer to be in your situation. If you had $1 billion, if someone said get me $1 billion and you won't have a situation. I think there's probably a greater chance that you could, any one of us would somehow figure out to come up with the money than if we had $1 billion and they offered us to make an exchange that we would. So this is the most precious thing in the world to us. Our children, our grandchildren are the most precious things. There's nothing more precious than that. So for that reason, specifically around the grandparents, and also, as I described, people who lose very, very young children, also, I feel like there's a lot of pressure around them. Come on, what's the big deal? You have other grandchildren, you have other children. It was just one day old. It wasn't such a big deal. And for that, that pulls at my heartstrings, because it kind of negates and invalidates the great and overwhelming tragedy and the pain that we all have. So so that's kind of why, even from the first, and this is for me exciting, because this is, I use that word in a funny way, this is meaningful to me that I'm able to do this, because I've always wanted to, for those reasons, be able to speak to grandparents. One of the things that's really interesting that, one of the things that's so interesting is about, specifically around being a grandparent who's lost a grandchild, is there's something very unique. I call it the double loss. That's the way I refer to it. Because as a grandparent, grandparents have their children and they have their grandchildren, and of course, there's different relationships with each. So the loss of a grandchild is so deep, because not only are we suffering that loss, but it's also our own child has lost, and that's a source of great pain as well. I spoke to a woman actually this week. She was talking about the difficulty that she had and the great sense of helplessness that she experienced, and saying, this has happened and I don't know how to deal with it. I feel an incredible sense of helplessness that I don't really know what to do. And as a grandmother, as a grandfather, it seemed like being a parent. This is who we are. Our kids are our world. And I could tell you, it's interesting. A lot of times you'll hear, when I speak to parents, they'll talk about the idea of, we had a dream. What happened in your dream? And the dream is often about some scenario where the parent sees their child who's passed on, and they want to do something for them, but they can't. And it's the most natural instinct in the world, is to protect and nurture and provide and care for our children. It's nothing more natural than that. It's not just among humans, it's among the animal kingdom, it's everywhere. This idea that we need to protect and take care of, not the same way as animals, but that base nature that we have, that we want to protect and take care of our kids, our grandkids, is as basic human nature as anything. So that's what I call the double loss, because it's so difficult that we're not able, that sense of helplessness, that the fact that we can't help our own kids as they're suffering, and also the loss that we've as grandparents have suffered, that how deep that is. And so for that, there's uniqueness to that, and it's important to acknowledge that. One of the questions someone asked us, they wanted to know, I just got a question here that said, I'll just read it verbatim. It says, what's so hard is needing and wanting to help our child, their spouse and grandchildren, not knowing how. And this is very common. This is a very common question, that I want to help. I'm feeling helpless. Kind of like what we talked about, just a moment ago. And I don't know how. I see that they're suffering. So a number of years ago, at one of our retreats, I decided to do something unique. And it was actually, my daughter Miriam was very instrumental in getting this and doing this done. We were doing a mom's group on the Saturday night at the retreat. So before Shabbos, right after Shabbos is over, I got a bunch of girls together. Actually, Miriam was very helpful with this. And we said, we want you to write a letter. And I said, I want you to write a collective letter, daughters, to your moms. What do you want to say? What do you think that moms need to know that their daughters want to tell them? You're not writing to your mom specifically, but collectively as a group, us girls as a group, writing to you moms as a group. And the overall consensus of what they wanted to know was really two things. And it was not easy for the moms to hear. I think actually it was very difficult for the moms, and it actually took some effort for everyone to be able to hear it in a way that wasn't too difficult for them to hear. I think that the two mechanisms, or the two sort of messages that they wanted to impart on the parent was, one, the idea that we have our own grieving process, and we don't have necessarily space, or do we want to have to be your therapist. We don't necessarily have the room or the ability to always to necessarily be there to support you, because we're really trying to survive ourselves. We're really trying to get by in our own way. And because of that, it's really difficult when we feel like this sense that you're expecting from us something. That's really difficult. That was the one message. Okay, we could talk more about that. The second message was the following. And this happens in couples. It happens when I work with couples. It happens with parents and kids, grandparents, every direction this happens. And that is the following. When I asked Rabbi Ginsburg to speak, I was very specific in who I asked to speak. As a matter of fact, I rarely have speakers. Because because I remember, even for myself, a specific scenario where I went to a speech and a certain person got up and they started talking about the pain that we go through, and how misunderstood we are, and how nobody in the world could really understand what this is like. And that particular speech was so hard for me because that person didn't have any loss at all. And it felt so disconnected. Like you don't really know what we're going through. That was number one. Number two is that when we're talking to parents or grandparents who are bereaved, lots of times we're really in survival mode. We're trying to get by. Some people are hanging by a thread. Some people are doing really well. But people are fragile sometimes, or raw sometimes. So what we're trying to do is trying to create an environment where people feel safe and so on. Couples especially grieve in different ways. Everybody grieves in different ways. Parents, kids, I can't tell you how many different types of scenarios there are where people grieve differently. And with that, the one thing that I think, the one piece of advice I think that, and sometimes it's counterintuitive, the one piece of advice that I could share with you is that the best way to what we can help our kids is to respect that they may grieve differently than we grieve. There are a lot of times our kids are going through different experiences and they're grieving, or they are working through their own feelings. So allowing them to have and to respect that however they're grieving, whichever way they're doing it, that it's okay. That we're not going to impose on them that they have to grieve like we do. This is a very, very difficult, especially when it comes to couples, and it applies with family members, parents as well. I hear very, very many times some parents really understand this well, and some parents don't, or grandparents, let's say, or parents don't understand it so well, but they can. You could change. You could. It's not over. So if you didn't follow this approach, and you think it might be helpful, you can just try it now. It doesn't have to be something that, well, I didn't do that and now I'm stuck. You're not. These are your kids, these are your grandkids. You can always, the relationship's there. We could change, we can grow, relationships can evolve. So the idea is that to respect that, I can't tell you how many times I'll have, let's say, a couple, or let's say a grandparent with a parent, or a parent with a child. Let's say with a parent with a child, they try to push the kid to go to therapy. Like, this kid knows he needs to go to therapy. So, and they push them and they push them. And the kid, if you're lucky, maybe one case, the kid maybe agrees to go, and then he sits there and wastes your money, but he doesn't really want to go. Or he goes there and doesn't utilize the time and never wants to go back again. And when they actually would be ready, they would choose not to go. So there are many, many scenarios. I could tell you countless scenarios where imposing on someone to grieve in a certain way, where that can negatively affect the relationship. So it's counterintuitive, but sometimes just letting them be, letting them grieve in their own way. And by doing that, each one of us, grandfather, grandmother, father, mother, husband, wife, we all grieve differently. We're all trying to find our own way to cope with something that really isn't natural, that's not normal, that nobody should have to go through. And because of that, just respecting that they have a different process. Sometimes that looks like, I feel like he should be grieving more, but I'm going to let him go through his process. Sometimes that looks like, I feel like he's grieving too much, and that's difficult for me to watch. And yet I'm still going to respect that that's how they grieve. And what I find is that in relationships where there is this sort of respect, I mean, it's actually universal for a lot of scenarios, but in this scenario, that it actually could bring the family closer. And what I'll give you an example. I have a parent who recently told me, they said, well, I don't know what to do, because you're telling me, Glenn, that I should kind of respect where they're at. But the problem is I have some kids who want to talk about it and some kids who don't. So I don't really know what to do. So I'll tell them, okay, get a piece of paper and write down the names of all the people in your house. And next to it, write, wants to talk about it, doesn't want to talk about it. And the ones who want to talk about it, then, and if you're somebody who wants to talk about it, go to town. When you're alone with that person, talk about it as much as you want, right? We want to find those opportunities, right? Because if you're a talker and you have a grandkid who's a talker, great. Let's connect. Talk about that. And then you have some kid who's really not up to talking about it. It's really difficult for him to talk about it. So then that kid, we're going to respect his wishes not to talk about it and not talk about it, even though it might be hard for us. Pictures is a classic example. I mean, constantly. I remember when I lost, during one of my losses, I remember the pictures. One of us liked pictures, another one didn't like a lot of pictures. But something that's hard to find a balance between those two. We have to find balance. But mostly, I think the best way we can help them is to let them know that we respect. We respect that everyone grieves differently, and whatever works for you is okay for me. And when I speak to somebody when I ask anyone to speak at our events, I say, please just use the words whatever works. Just use the words what works for me is. And just saying what works for me, that's not something you could battle with. If it works for me, then no one could argue with that. So and the same thing, and it goes the other way also. This is what works for me, so it doesn't have to work for you, and that's okay. So I think that's a really critical part about how we can help our kids. I hope that was a little bit answered the question. I think that goes hand in hand with what I hear a lot from parents. The parents who have lost a child, about what they want. This is, what I'm sharing with you is not necessarily my own personal opinion, although it kind of is, but it's what I hear over and over again. We just want them to support us. If I'm going through a tough time, I don't want them to tell me, hey, get over with it. And if I want not to talk about it, I want to be okay not to talk about it. And however I'm grieving. And I think that happens between couples, grandparents, the couplehood is there also. Everyone's is gonna kind of grieve in their own way. So I think that's really, really fundamental to the core of how we can help each other and help ourselves. Is there any more questions? You can post in whatever questions you want. That's okay. Just want to get to. Okay, so another thing that I hear a lot is simchas, right? Rabbi Ginsburg talked about simchas. What do we do? Simchas can be very difficult. They can really challenge it. It's interesting. Rabbi, I think it's what the rabbi was talking about, that he made the coffee in the morning. You see, a lot of times when there's a loss, one of the things that helps us is just to go about our routine. And we kind of just do what we normally do, and that's helpful, right? For a lot of people, that's something that's helpful. Okay. When you're sitting at a wedding, when someone's getting married, nephew, a cousin, we're sitting at the simcha hall, and the photographer says, "Is everyone here?" it's very difficult. It's very difficult to like kind of get in that mindset of using that mechanism. Like there's no reason why everybody wouldn't be here. It's a wedding. It's a simcha. So it's hard to kind of navigate and think of it as, oh, this is an example of where I'm just going to pretend like, I'm going to go about my normal day. So that makes it a lot more difficult in those scenarios. So I think one of the things I think Rabbi Ginsburg touched upon, but one of the things that I like to think of is, and I had recently had somebody who had lost a child recently, and they've been making a simcha. And what I say to somebody in that scenario sometimes is I'll say, of course, say Mazel Tov, such great news. And I'll also say something like, it's bittersweet. Simcha is going to be bittersweet. And I think for some people, accepting that simchas can be bittersweet, sometimes that can allow a person to actually feel the simcha. Sometimes we're so caught up in feeling like there's a simcha and we're not enjoying it, so we feel guilty about it. Like it's a simcha, I'm supposed to be happy about this. How can I not be enjoying this? And what I find is what I say to people, it can be bittersweet. They appreciate, first of all, that somebody knows that there's something missing. Everybody's not here. We're all not here. There's something missing. There's a void here, and that's something that's helpful in one hand. The other thing that it does is it allows us to accept ourselves as human and forgive ourselves. I know it's a simcha, but I'm also suffering. This is hard. Just like that grandmother that Rabbi Ginsburg was talking about. I hear that a lot. And I think one of the things I think is also helpful is that when we make room for our feelings, so when we make room for that feeling, it says, it's okay. I accept myself that even though I'm very happy about this, that there's also part of me that's struggling with it. And by making room for your feelings, so it makes room for all your feelings. And that can also open up that the simcha itself, you can actually enjoy it because you're making room for your feelings and you're acknowledging, yeah, this is hard, but I'm one of the things I always teach my the people that my clients, is that we can have more than one emotion at a time. Not only can we have more than one emotion at a time, we can have conflicting emotions. We can have two different, totally conflicting emotions, and they can both live. And I think to the degree that we allow ourselves to do that, then it for a lot of people allows them the opportunity to go on and to actually enjoy the simcha. Where if they would just keep fighting and struggling with this idea that how could I not be only happy, that it makes it really hard to enjoy it at all. So the last thing I just wanted to just kind of talk about right before we end is the following. People ask me all the time, they kind of ask the question in different ways, and I'll phrase it this way. And this is true for parents, it's true for grandparents, it's true for siblings, is how do we go on? Or they'll say, how do you turn this is a dialogue that turned into a monologue, right? There was a relationship, you and your grandchild, and now it's a one-way street. What do? How do we expect it to move on? How do we kind of get through the day? So I think one of the things that I, sort of encourage people to do is to accept that. I had a friend once, and he was, by way of analogy, he was the gabbai in a shul, the temporary shul for Yom Kippur, and he was in charge of all the logistics. And I remember that somebody asked, and they said, and I told him, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. And I'm going to tell you, I said, listen, I just want you to know it's going to be too hot, and it's going to be too cold, and it's going to be the davening too fast, and it's going to be too slow. And it's going to be too noisy, it's going to be too quiet, it's going to be too pressured, it's going to be too loud, it's going to be, the singing is going to be great, it's going to be, sometimes it's going to be bad, and it's going to be all in between. This journey that you all are on is a bumpy road. And there are times when we're going to feel sometimes multiple emotions at once, and sometimes different emotions, one after another. So there's a Gemara, and the Gemara says that a person who has worries in his heart. It says, the person has worries in his heart. It advises yasichena. So there's a machlokas. What does it mean, yasichena? Does it mean for the word masiach das, to distract ourselves, or is it for the word siach, to talk it over? And I think it could be said that I once heard someone say, it could be this different types of people. And I once shared, and I said, it's not just different types of people. There's more than that. It could be the same person, just different times, one right after the other. And the idea is that we have to allow ourselves to say, I'm going to accept myself that I need different things. I have different needs at different times. And sometimes what I need is to talk to a friend. Sometimes I just need that friend. And I encourage everyone to find that friend that they could talk to about their loss. Somebody's going to listen and just allow them to be, allow them to feel. It might be a professional, and it might also be just a friend who we could just talk to and say, I'm struggling. Can I talk about my grandchild? Or it's her birthday, or the day he had his upshur, whatever it is. And I want to talk about it. And sometimes we need to just go about our lives and not think about it. Sometimes that's helpful. Different people say, some people will throw themselves into learning, some people throw themselves into work, some people will throw themselves into doing volunteer work, all different things. And that's okay. One thing I tell every client that I work with who's going through this process is do what works. Whatever works is what's right. This is not a normal situation. There's no one cookie cutter solution. And I could, people ask me, well, your two losses, well, were they the same? I say, no, every loss is different. Every loss is different because depending on the relationship, depending on the person, just forgive yourself and say, I'm going to be okay with doing what I need to do for myself. And whatever that is, just allowing yourself to forgive yourself for having a tough day and forgive yourself for needing what you need and without judgment. And finding that friend you could, if that was what works for you, find that friend. And if talking doesn't work for you, and distracting yourself by going to get ice cream or going for coffee or playing sports or going to the library or whatever it is, if that's what you need, then that's okay. Forgive yourself for that. Give yourself what you need. And I think that's really critical, especially when there's a world out there that doesn't necessarily feel the same sense of acceptance for where you're at. And the other thing that Rabbi Ginsburg alluded to and talked about was this idea of finding a way to connect with your grandchild. When I say that, it means a lot of things, a lot to different people. And I guess what I'm referring to is often if you could think of your grandchild and think of something that was meaningful to them. And sometimes it takes a little creativity depending on the age of the child, right? Sometimes it's about what that child might have wanted, or depending on the age, or what you think they might have cared about, or what was really important to them. And engaging in that. Right? There was a woman who was whose daughter was very into reading. Reading was very important to her. So she went out on her daughter's birthday, and she went out and she bought books for people who couldn't afford books. And she went around and she bought them books. And that gave her a sense of connection. And there are many, many ways that could be helpful. And if that's helpful to you, great. And like I tell all my clients, if it doesn't work, throw it out. Whatever works for you is what's right and what's best. So I want to just end by thanking everybody who attended today, and also share that I don't take for granted what it means for all of you, and the fact that you're able to come here today says a lot about wanting to find that sense of connection and be able to help their kids and their grandkids. Yeah. So I gave them my number. Everyone can reach out to me if they if they want to talk more about it, or if they need anything. Happy to to help. You can email at RSVP or info@mayrim.com, or call me. or text me. We're here for the grandparents too. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Rabbi Ginsburg, and to everybody who made this possible. Have a good night.